Raymond, Silk, Morelli built an invisible empire. Lena Morales was the only FBI agent smart enough to see it. What followed was a decade-long shadow war. No gunfights in the streets, no fingerprints left behind. Just two brilliant minds locked in a silent battle where every move could be the last. In the early 1990s, while the streets of Chicago were dominated by the sounds of hip-hop and the struggle of urban life, something far more sinister was growing in the background. Hidden behind the noise of city life, a new kind of criminal organization was forming. One that didn't wear colors, didn't show guns in public, and didn't advertise its presence through graffiti or local rumors. It was called the Ghost Syndicate. Nobody knew who started it or where it had come from. All they knew was that things were changing. Drug corners were being taken over silently. Bookies and street hustlers were suddenly paying cuts to people they'd never seen. The syndicate's methods were so quiet that local police dismissed it as street talk, but federal agencies were starting to notice patterns. Unconnected cases of extortion, encrypted communication intercepts, and cash movements too sophisticated for street thugs were building up. Something big was happening, and nobody could put a face to it. At the center of this silent empire was Raymond, Silk, Morelli, a man as mysterious as he was intelligent. Unlike most gang leaders of the time, Silk didn't come from poverty or broken homes. He was born into a quiet, middle-class family in Milwaukee, the son of a retired military officer and a school teacher. He attended college on a mathematics scholarship, but dropped out in his second year with no explanation. That was the last official trace of Raymond Morelli. From that point on, Silk was born. A name earned for his calm voice, smooth planning, and the way he could talk his way out of anything. Silk had a gift most gang leaders didn't: patience. He didn't build the Ghost Syndicate with street soldiers. He built it with people who could operate like ghosts. He recruited former military communications experts, hackers from college campuses, accountants who had been fired for fraud. They didn't just sell drugs, they controlled the pipeline. They didn't just rob banks, they rewrote ATM networks. The syndicate didn't fight turf wars. They bought entire neighborhoods through dummy corporations and shell companies, then used those properties for distribution and laundering money. It wasn't crime. It was an invisible corporation, and Silk was the CEO. Unlike traditional gangs, there were no tattoos, no ranks, no rituals. Members used encrypted pagers and burner phones, often never meeting each other in person. Everything was compartmentalized. If someone got arrested, they only knew their small piece. No one had the full map except Silk. He kept his circle small and communication digital. Surveillance couldn't catch what it couldn't see. Even his top lieutenants, names like Lyon, Stone, Harris, Nicky Voss, and Trevor, Draft, Wills, only knew as much as they needed to know. The Ghost Syndicate grew like a virus. They spread into Detroit, Cleveland, St. Louis, even down to Atlanta. Every operation followed the same blueprint: move in quietly, buy local loyalty, shut down competitors without violence when possible, and fade into the background. Their violence, when it did happen, was clinical. Quick disappearances, no bodies, just silence. The syndicate wasn't feared for its brutality, it was feared for its invisibility. By 1994, whispers of ghost money started circulating among federal task forces. Unexplained cash spikes in small businesses, foreign wire transfers connected to dummy charities. Morales, an FBI agent working on drug cartel cases in the West Coast, heard the name Silk during an unrelated bust in Arizona. The informant claimed he knew someone who'd moved drugs for a man with no name, no number, just instructions. "He's like a ghost," the man had said. That phrase stuck. The Ghost Syndicate was now too big to ignore. They had no clear origin, no known headquarters, and no legal footprint. But their presence was undeniable. Silk had created a model that no one had seen before, a gang that wasn't a gang, an organization without a face. And while the streets remained quiet, behind the scenes, a Cold War between the FBI and the syndicate had begun. But at that time, nobody, not even the most seasoned federal agents, realized just how far Silk's influence had already spread. The game had already started, and most didn't even know they were players. By early 1995, the FBI could no longer deny the growing presence of the Ghost Syndicate. Reports from field offices across multiple states were piling up, evidence of a coordinated network operating with a level of sophistication not seen in typical street gangs. The syndicate didn't leave blood on sidewalks or tags on alley walls. Instead, they left gaps in bank ledgers, missing shipments, erased surveillance footage, and most disturbingly, silence from informants who once spoke freely. That was when the Bureau launched Operation Quiet Storm. It was designed as a full-scale, multi-agency operation to infiltrate, track, and dismantle the syndicate from the inside out. Leading the operation was Special Agent Lena Morales, a sharp and methodical agent with a reputation for bringing down drug cartels in Los Angeles and San Diego. She had built her career on patience, intelligence, and persistence, and she knew that catching ghosts would require a new kind of hunt. Morales understood this wouldn't be a war won with street arrests or wiretaps alone. The enemy was smarter, cleaner, and far more calculated. She began by assembling a specialized task force made up of cybercrime experts, forensic accountants, and undercover operatives trained in long-term infiltration. The mission was clear: expose the chain of command, find their financial lifelines, and bring down the man called Silk. But before the Bureau could make its first move, the syndicate struck first. 3 informants who had previously offered vague details about the syndicate went off the grid within a week. One vanished while on federal protection. Another was found floating in a retention pond, hands bound and mouth filled with shredded currency. The third survived, but only barely. He was discovered in a motel room with both hands shattered and a message carved into his thigh. Silence isn't optional. It's required. The message was brutal but strategic. Silk wanted the Bureau to know that this wasn't the usual street war. He didn't just eliminate threats, he erased them. Morales realized then that whoever they were dealing with had access to intelligence. Surveillance routes were being compromised. Targets were disappearing just before scheduled raids. There was no other explanation. Someone inside the Bureau was leaking information. That meant Operation Quiet Storm was already compromised. Morales adjusted her strategy immediately. She stopped logging sensitive files into shared servers and began briefing her agents in person, face to face, with no written documentation. She changed safehouse locations, scrubbed phone lines, and began narrowing down who had access to specific case details. But she needed a breakthrough, something concrete that would give her a way in. That's when they caught Darren. Glitch. Knox. Glitch was arrested during a joint sting targeting a credit card fraud ring in Cleveland. A lanky, nervous tech specialist in his late 20s, he had no criminal record but plenty of online aliases. During questioning, he confessed to being a digital middleman for a faceless client who paid in cryptocurrency. He never met them, never spoke over the phone. Everything was encrypted and paid up front. But when agents traced his communications, the patterns matched messages previously intercepted and attributed to the Ghost Syndicate's financial operations. Realizing the value of what they had, Morales offered Glitch full immunity in exchange for his cooperation. He agreed to talk. Over the next 2 days, he detailed an advanced digital infrastructure, secure servers bouncing through Eastern Europe, access points hidden within nonprofit databases, money laundering networks disguised as crypto startups. He even provided IP traces that seemed to lead back to a private network in Chicago's South Loop, believed to be a command hub. But Glitch never made it to court. Less than 72 hours after he was placed in protective custody, he was found dead in his holding cell. The cause was listed as an allergic reaction, but toxicology later revealed an obscure compound, undetectable through routine screening and almost impossible to trace. Someone had breached federal protection and killed him with surgical precision. The FBI was stunned. Their key witness had been eliminated under their own roof, and the method suggested expertise far beyond street-level hit jobs. The Ghost Syndicate wasn't just outsmarting them. It was inside their system, watching, responding, and neutralizing threats in real time. For Morales, this changed everything. The syndicate was no longer just a criminal network. It was a shadow force with tentacles reaching into federal institutions. The war she thought she was beginning had already been underway, and she was already playing catch-up. After the shocking death of Darren, Glitch, Knox inside federal custody, it became clear that the Ghost Syndicate had infiltrated deeper than anyone at the FBI had imagined. The Bureau's sense of security was shattered. If a protected witness could be silently killed within their own facility, then no agent, no plan, and no piece of evidence was truly safe. Special Agent Lena Morales knew now that she was not just facing a criminal empire, but one that had embedded itself within the very systems meant to stop it. The question she had to answer immediately was both terrifying and essential: who inside the Bureau was feeding information to the Syndicate? She launched an internal audit, quietly and without formal declarations. Official channels were no longer trustworthy. Files were reviewed offline. Meetings were held in random locations, not offices. Morales created a list of every agent, analyst, and support staff who had direct or indirect access to Operation Quiet Storm files. From there, she narrowed it further based on specific knowledge leaks, informants compromised, financial leads exposed, and raids that had failed just minutes before execution. Over time, one name kept surfacing: Special Agent Brian Keller. On the surface, Keller was the perfect agent. Clean record, multiple awards, and 2 decades of service. He was respected, liked, and known for his calm under pressure. But Morales found inconsistencies, small, almost invisible discrepancies, access logs that didn't match sign-ins, cases that Keller was supposed to be assisting with, yet had deep internal notes on. There were subtle shifts in his workload during every major syndicate-related failure. It was a pattern only visible when compared across different databases, something no one had done until now. Morales arranged a quiet surveillance team to monitor Keller. She didn't want to spook him, and she didn't trust the Bureau's Internal Affairs Department. Within 2 weeks, her suspicions were confirmed. Keller was meeting late at night with someone who had no official ties to law enforcement. Communications were exchanged using burner phones, and once, he was caught disposing of what appeared to be shredded documents near an abandoned warehouse. Morales had seen enough, but she didn't arrest him immediately. Instead, she followed the trail further, tracking his phone records, financial activity, and known contacts. What she discovered was even more shocking than his betrayal. Keller had been working with the Ghost Syndicate for nearly 9 years, starting shortly after his daughter was kidnapped during a trip overseas. Morales found sealed records detailing a botched investigation into a trafficking ring in Istanbul. The girl had been missing for days until, mysteriously, she was returned unharmed. Turkish authorities had no explanation, but shortly afterward, Keller began exhibiting a change in behavior. Extra caution, sudden withdrawals from high-profile assignments, and a growing record of cases quietly reassigned or closed without cause. It became evident that Silk had saved Keller's daughter when the Bureau could not. Whether it was out of gratitude, fear, or guilt, Keller had become a double agent, protecting the very network he was assigned to destroy. He wasn't just leaking information. He was strategically shaping investigations to fail. When Morales finally confronted him, Keller didn't resist. He was arrested quietly, without incident. During interrogation, he admitted to working with the Syndicate, but refused to name others. He claimed Silk had saved his family and demanded nothing in return except silence and loyalty. Morales was left with more questions than answers. How many more agents had been turned? How deep did the influence go? Keller was just one node in a network that clearly operated on trust, fear, and favors beyond law enforcement's reach. The news of Keller's arrest was leaked to the media, intentionally. Morales wanted to send a message to the Syndicate. Their mole had been exposed, and the game was changing. But even as headlines spread, the victory felt hollow. Keller's capture had come too late. The Syndicate had already adapted, already disappeared deeper into the shadows. And somewhere, watching the fallout unfold, Silk was planning his next move. Patient, silent, and always 2 steps ahead. The arrest of Brian Keller made national headlines, shaking the foundation of the FBI and sending ripples across law enforcement circles nationwide. It was rare for an agency veteran to be exposed as a mole, especially one embedded so deeply in a case of such magnitude. While many within the Bureau were reeling from the betrayal, Lena Morales knew that the real work had only just begun. The Ghost Syndicate had been warned. They would be dismantling, relocating, or vanishing altogether. If any move was to be made, it had to be swift, coordinated, and overwhelming. Morales and her team accelerated Operation Quiet Storm into its final phase, a full-scale offensive against every known asset, contact, an operation linked to the Syndicate. Using the fragmented intel retrieved from Keller's seized devices and the analysis from forensic teams, the FBI mapped out over 150 properties, businesses, warehouses, and shell corporations suspected of being syndicate fronts. It was the largest operation of its kind in years. The raids were scheduled for the same day, same hour, across 10 states, to prevent Silk from having time to shift his resources. On a cold morning in November 1996, the Bureau struck. SWAT teams stormed warehouses. Forensic units seized hard drives, phones, and financial records. Helicopters hovered over industrial districts while armored trucks sealed off escape routes. In Chicago alone, 23 locations were raided simultaneously. Morales led the main task force into what was believed to be the Central Operations Hub, a nondescript commercial building in the South Loop with no signage or public records. It looked empty. Inside, they found reinforced doors, soundproof walls, and computer servers running through dozens of proxy networks. Whatever had been there had been cleared out days earlier. The same scene repeated in city after city. In Detroit, a warehouse once believed to be a drug processing plant was gutted, save for a few coded ledgers and a strange message carved into the wall. You found the echo, not the voice. In Cleveland, a supposed safe house had burned to the ground hours before agents arrived. Every major syndicate location was either empty, rigged for destruction, or operating under a decoy identity. Still, the Bureau did not leave empty-handed. Over 100 arrests were made during the operation. Many were mid-level operatives, money couriers, front business managers, and data handlers. Among them was Nikki Voss, a key lieutenant suspected of handling the syndicate's East Coast operations. She refused to speak, but her capture sent a strong signal that the FBI had finally cracked open the shell. Morales hoped that flipping the right person could eventually lead to Silk. But as weeks passed and interrogations dragged on, a grim realization set in. No one had seen Silk, not in months, not even his closest operatives. He had completely vanished. Some believed he was still orchestrating everything from the shadows. Others thought he had faked his death and escaped. Then came a twist that no one expected. In early January 1997, a car exploded in Queens, New York, killing a man later identified through dental records as Edward Kane. The explosion was precise and surgical, suggesting professional execution. But what caught the Bureau's attention was Kane's file. He was a suspected arms broker with possible syndicate ties. Upon further inspection, the forensic team discovered something extraordinary. Edward Kane's dental profile matched the only partial records the FBI had ever collected on Raymond, Silk, Morelli. Morales was called in. She reviewed the photos, autopsy, and scene reports. Everything seemed to fit, but something didn't sit right. The body was burned beyond recognition. No witnesses saw Kane enter the vehicle. The explosion was too clean. The timing, too convenient. If this was Silk, it meant he had died without a final move, without control, a character contradiction that Morales couldn't accept. The funeral was held quietly. Few attended. No family members claimed the body. The media reported that the FBI believed the leader of the Ghost Syndicate had died in an explosion, ending the reign of one of the most elusive criminal masterminds of the decade. But behind closed doors, Morales wasn't buying it. She ordered the case to remain open, classified, limited access, and under constant review. Because if Silk had taught her one thing, it was this: nothing about him was ever accidental. And if the king falls without a fight, maybe he was never in the castle to begin with. Months passed after the supposed death of Raymond, Silk, Morelli, and the Ghost Syndicate appeared to vanish with him. Without its mastermind, the network began to fracture. Some of the arrested operatives turned on each other in exchange for lighter sentences. Safe houses went cold, laundered money streams dried up. To the public, it looked like the FBI had finally dismantled one of the most advanced and dangerous criminal organizations in modern history. News outlets praised Operation Quiet Storm, and Lena Morales was quietly promoted to Deputy Director of Intelligence Strategy. But even with the headlines declaring victory, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The FBI had no footage of Silk's final days, no verified sightings, no solid link between him and the body identified as Edward Kane, other than questionable dental records and circumstantial evidence. Morales had studied Silk's tactics for years. Every decision he made was layered, deliberate, and designed for long-term advantage. Dying in a random car explosion seemed out of character. There was no farewell message, no final taunt, no trace of the psychological games he was known for. It didn't feel like the end. It felt like a distraction. Then, nearly a year later, an unmarked envelope arrived at a federal office in Washington, D.C., addressed simply to Morales. Inside was a single, slightly faded photograph. It showed a busy street scene, filled with tourists, market stalls, and passing traffic. At first glance, it appeared ordinary. But near the edge of the frame, walking in the opposite direction of the crowd, was a man wearing sunglasses and a cane. The image was blurry, but Morales knew what to look for. On the man's left hand was a ring, silver, square-edged, with a black stone. It was the same ring Silk had worn in every known photo of him from years before. The back of the photo was blank. No fingerprints, no location tag, nothing digital to trace. But Morales recognized the architecture and setting. It was Marrakesh, Morocco, known for its chaotic energy, loose documentation laws, and deep-rooted black market networks. The message was clear. Silk was alive, watching, and still steps ahead. Morales reopened the classified files without informing the broader bureau. She created a private task group composed of only 3 analysts, trusted colleagues with no digital access to the case files. The investigation resumed quietly, with a focus on Silk's potential new aliases, travel patterns, and connections abroad. But nothing stuck. Every lead turned into a dead end. New shell corporations popped up globally, some bearing a similar pattern to the old syndicate operations, but always just beyond reach. It was as if Silk had reinvented his empire in a new form, quieter, smaller, but still dangerous. Meanwhile, former syndicate operatives who had been released or entered witness protection began disappearing. Some were confirmed dead, others simply vanished. Morales believed Silk was either tying up loose ends or rebuilding his inner circle. There were rumors circulating in the intelligence community, unverified whispers about a mysterious figure known only as the Architect, orchestrating criminal logistics for international clients. No image, no confirmed identity, just patterns, digital footprints in cybercrime, discrete financial disruptions, silent trades between rogue states. Every time Morales examined the data, she saw hints of the same design, the same invisible fingerprints Silk had left behind years ago. Despite the Bureau's official stance that the Ghost Syndicate was dead, Morales knew the truth. It hadn't been destroyed. It had evolved. Silk had let the FBI believe they won because it suited his next move. He burned a body, faked a death, and stepped into a deeper level of invisibility. The FBI had closed the book, but the story wasn't over. Now, whenever Morales sees a new case involving coordinated silence, ghost companies, or clean disappearances, she pauses. Somewhere out there, Silk is still watching, still planning. And she knows that until the day his real face appears again, the world remains vulnerable to the man who proved that the greatest power doesn't come from being seen. It comes from being forgotten.